61 human footprints pressed into white gypsum at White Sands, around 23,000 years old, laid down deep inside the last ice age. Not tools, not a legend, feet. But the people who dated them did something rare. Before any critic could, they named the weakest part of their own claim. This is how that claim got smaller and harder to break. White Sands National Park sits in the Tularosa Basin of New Mexico, on the bed of a lake that dried long ago. In 2021, at a spot the researchers call Locality 2, a team documented 61 human footprints set across 8 separate layers of sediment. To fix them in time, they dated something laced through those same layers, the seed beds of a small water plant. And that is where the trouble starts, because a plant that grows underwater can drink carbon that is already old and read older than the ground it sits in. The most striking date in early American archaeology rested on the one material most able to lie about its age. Let's be clear about what these are and what they are not. They are anatomically human tracks, preserved where they were made, in layers that can be dated. That much is unusually direct. A stone tool can be moved, reworked, argued over. A footprint is a body, in a place, at a moment. But a footprint does not give a name. It does not say which people these were, or how they came to be standing on a lake shore in the Ice Age Southwest, or whether anyone had come before them. The tracks carry no route, no origin, no census. They are a moment, not a migration. And yet, look at the number. 23,000 years. Read it once, and the mind wants to finish the sentence for you. The first Americans, finally found. That pull is the most natural thing in the world, and it is exactly what the evidence does not support. Keep that difference close. We are going to need it. There is one more thing worth knowing before we go further. You cannot walk out and see these footprints for yourself. According to the National Park Service, the tracks are not accessible to visitors. What the public can see since early 2024 is a set of casts and an exhibit at the visitor center. The originals stay in the ground or under study, which raises the cost of getting the reading right. We cannot simply return to the trail and check. So the honest move is the uncomfortable one. When a claim is this big and you want it to be true this badly, you do not defend it. You attack it at the exact seam where you are most afraid it will tear. To understand how a footprint becomes a date, you have to go down into the ground. On the eastern edge of Alkali Flat, the researchers cut a trench. That is the quiet turning point of the whole investigation. The moment a surface find becomes a sequence. On a flat, a footprint is just a shape in the dust. In the wall of a trench, it sits inside a stack of layers, each one laid down after the one below it. Time, made visible as sediment. What the trench revealed was not a single track, but a record. 61 human footprints spread across 8 distinct horizons, 8 different levels in the layered sediment, which means people returned to this ground again and again, not in a single afternoon. And running through those same layers were the seed beds of that water plant, the ones the team would use to fix the whole sequence in time. The sediment itself tells a story of place. This was not the floor of a deep, still lake. It was a margin, a shifting mosaic of wet ground and dry, the edge of a body of water that grew and shrank. Ground soft enough to take a footprint, and dry enough, often enough, to keep it. Everything the site can tell us now rides on those layers being read correctly. The stratigraphy is the machine. The footprint is only the beginning of the question. Here is the number the seeds produced. The layers dated from about 22,800 years ago to about 21,100, a span of nearly 2,000 years, all of it deep inside the last glacial maximum, the coldest stretch of the Ice Age. And here is the problem the team wrote into their own paper. The seeds came from Ruppia, a plant that lives underwater. Plants are built from the carbon they pull out of their surroundings. A plant standing in air takes its carbon from the air. But a plant living in hard water can take up carbon that has been dissolved out of ancient rock, carbon that is already thousands of years old before the plant ever uses it. Date that plant, and it can read far older than the ground it grew in. Scientists call it a reservoir effect. In plain terms, the ruler might be stretched. Sit with what that means. The most important date might be too old, not because anyone made a mistake in the lab, but because the material itself was born misleading. Now, the ordinary thing to do with a weakness like that is to keep quiet and hope no one notices. The team did the opposite. They named the hard water problem themselves in the original publication before a single critic had raised a hand. They pointed straight at the soft joint in their own claim and left it there in print for anyone to pull on. So they pressed. In 2023, a team set out to date the same sequence again, but this time with materials that could not drink old water. If the seeds were suspect because they lived underwater, then the answer was to date things that had lived in the open air and things that had never been alive at all. The first was pollen. Not just any pollen. Pollen from conifers, land plants that take their carbon straight from the atmosphere with no hard water problem to worry about. The catch is that pollen grains are microscopic. To gather enough of a single type to run one clean radiocarbon date, the researchers had to isolate on the order of 75,000 grains, sample by sample. That number is worth pausing on. It is the physical shape of doubt taken seriously. Tens of thousands of specks, sorted by hand and machine, to press on the one joint they most wanted to hold. The second method left living carbon behind entirely. Using optically stimulated luminescence, they measured how long grains of quartz in the footprint layers had been buried away from sunlight, an independent clock running on physics instead of biology. Then they compared the new ages to the old ones. They matched. The pollen dates and the quartz dates came back statistically indistinguishable from the original seed dates. The material most able to lie, and the materials that could not lie in the same way, told the same time. That could have been the end of it. It was not. In 2024, a group of specialists published a careful objection. They argued that the problems had not really been solved, that hard water effects, pollen that might have been reworked and carried in from older layers, and assumptions built into the luminescence method still left the chronology unreliable. The original team published a reply, arguing that those objections did not hold up. Two sets of experts in the open literature disagreeing about the same layers of dirt. Then, in 2025, a separate line of evidence arrived from a different direction. An independent group dated the deposits of the old lake system around the site. 26 radiocarbon dates run in 2 laboratories that had no part in the footprint work. Their results, roughly 22,400 to 20,700 years old, supported the same window of time. It came with an honest limit. Those dates measure related layers of the ancient lake, not the footprint surfaces themselves. Support at a distance, not a direct verdict. The pressing never fully stopped, and saying so out loud is part of the discipline. Now step back and look at what actually held. The headline version of this story says, "A date rewrote the first chapter of America." It is worth being precise about what got rewritten, because it is not the chapter you might expect. What survived every test is not the biggest claim. It is the smallest one. People stood on this ground at this time. That single narrow sentence is sturdy, and it is sturdy for a specific reason. It was struck at its weakest seam, the hard water problem the team named themselves, and it did not move. The footprints never told us who was first. They never named a people, a root, a beginning. That was never the strong part of the evidence, and it is not what the testing defended. So the rewrite is not a grand new opening chapter for the continent. It is a narrowing, a claim pared down until it could carry weight. You earn the right to believe a thing like this by pressing hardest exactly where you most want it to hold, and then by claiming no more than what survived. And what survived is not small. A firm human presence in the southwest, in the depth of the Ice Age, real and hard-won. It sits inside a much longer story, how people first spread across these continents, and that story is nowhere near finished. This evidence does not close it. It was never going to. But think about the two ways you could tell it. One reaches for the grand version, the origin, the first, the rewritten beginning. The other stops at the edge of what was actually tested and goes no further. You have met both kinds of people. By the time you have lived a while, you tend to know which one you trust when it matters. So go back to where we started. 61 footprints pressed into white gypsum on the floor of a lake that is gone. We still do not know their names, or their language, or how they came to be there, or whether others walked the continent before them. Specialists still argue over the layers. All of that stays open. But the feet are not in doubt. Someone stood on this ground in the cold heart of the Ice Age, and the record of it held, tested exactly where it was weakest, and refusing the larger word it could so easily have claimed. The rewrite was never a bigger story. It was a smaller sentence, and it was strong enough to stand on.